The continued police shootings and other incidents related to the deaths of black people in the U.S. have started a movement, and it reignited conversations about the roles of police nationwide. It's been a year since George Floyd was murdered, but even before that, a Ferguson, Missouri police officer shot and killed 18-year-old Michael Brown. Ferguson has since updated its policies as police departments around the country work to win back public trust. Jason Armstrong is with us now. He is the chief of the Ferguson Police Department. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, we should make it clear that you were not the chief of police when Michael Brown was killed. You were working in law enforcement. You were a police officer in Georgia, but you watched the events unfold in Ferguson. And, you know, I heard you say that it had a profound impact on you. Can you talk a little about that?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. And so when I saw, what happened up here in Ferguson after that incident, and I followed, what ensued afterwards and the Department of Justice report on the police department up here. And when I read that report, I saw a lot of similarities between the Ferguson Police Department and Forest Park, Georgia, where I was currently working as an officer and where I was a commander there. And just seeing the similarities and just thinking, if this shooting would have happened in my city down in Georgia, would we have seen the same type of reaction? And I felt it was strongly possible that we would have, because a lot of the complaints and things that the community members were making up here about the police department were some of the similar complaints that I was hearing about my department down in Georgia. And so that really ignited me to get out in the community and be more involved and kind of be the face of leading the efforts to try to build up those stronger relationships between the community and the police department.
So Michael Brown was killed in 2014. You fast forward 5 years, and you are the chief of police in Ferguson. It's been quite interesting. Ferguson hasn't had a police shooting since 2015. How did the department achieve that? And does it have anything to do with the new duty to report policy or any of the other reforms that you've put in place?
Well, actually, Ferguson officer hasn't been involved in a shooting since the Michael Brown incident in 2014. And so that was the last time that we had something. And so one thing that I like to highlight is even going back to 2014, before I was even here, it wasn't like officers here were involved in shootings on a regular basis. That was an anomaly that happened here. And so, the policies and things that we've created since then, and some of those policies, it took years to really go through and get them ironed out. And so I wouldn't put all of that on the policies that we created. I put a lot of that on, the people that were here and the work that was being done already, before those policies were being implemented. Now, when you add the policies on top of that, that just gives you a higher level of accountability that's built into the organization, not just for the officer that may be involved in the incident, but the officers that are around or that witness, any activity that may be, not meeting the standards of our policies or may not be acceptable behavior. It puts the onus on them to make sure that they bring that information forward, and all of that stuff has been tailored and laid out in our policies.
So I want to just hit you with some of the issues that a lot of us have been talking about to try to figure out how to reimagine policing. Missouri's legislature passed a bill to limit the use of chokeholds just a couple of weeks ago. The governor needs to sign this before it actually becomes law. But I want to ask you, there's been a lot of talk about chokeholds. It's in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to ban chokeholds. But it's not lost on many people that a number of police departments have already banned chokeholds. Chokeholds were banned in New York when Eric Gardner was killed. So I'm wondering if a ban on chokeholds is, a bit of a distraction. Do you think it could lead to change?
It could lead to change. But, as we saw the case of Derek Chauvin and we saw their police chief get up and testify, and the actions that Derek Chauvin took were against their policies. And that's why he was fired, so quickly after that incident happened. And so, we can enact all the policies in the world that say we can't do this. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to the decisions that people make, in the heat of the moment or when they're in those situations. And so, a lot of that comes back to just the training that our officers get, and also just who we hire into the profession. I can send somebody to a training class all day long that they can pass, but is that really impacting how they think and how they view other people? And that's really what we're trying to focus on, and what we're trying to get to, to the heart of, is just making sure that we have quality people in this profession that we're sending out there every day to do the job that we're asking them to do.
Yeah, because here's the thing. There has been a lot of talk about how police officers have been trained, whether police departments have become more militarized, that, a lot of the work that police officers are doing actually sort of leans more into social work, but they're not trained to do that sort of stuff. But I always think, police officers are just coming from the community, and whatever ills are in the community, you're going to find in the police department, you're going to find in an accountant's office, you're going to find everywhere. You can institute policies and you can tweak your training, but can you train implicit bias away? You know what I mean? Like, it's bigger. These are problems that are bigger than the police department, but we're asking the police department to sort of solve it in a bubble, even though things like implicit bias may be, obviously spread out throughout society. So I want to ask you about tackling implicit bias. How do you go about doing that on a police force?
And so I do think that is something that we can train away. Now, we'll never be perfect at it, but I think we can do an awfully good job at handling it. And so, the first step in doing that is just recognizing that we all have biases. And that's the hardest part to really get people to buy in on and to understand. A lot of people and a lot of officers that I've had conversations with, when you bring up bias and asking them to admit their bias, they automatically think that we're talking about racist, or that makes them a racist. And that's not, when we talk about biases, that's not what it is. That is a part of it, and a very important part of it that we have to overcome and work through. But when we talk about biases, we all have biases. And so when we talk about bias training, it's going through that training to help us identify our biases and to help us identify how they impact what we do and how we go about doing our job, for us to be mindful of it, so we can kind of catch ourselves in doing it. We just recently went through implicit bias training here in Ferguson, and a couple of things that they highlighted was, fast traps. And when we talk about fast traps, it's just quick decisions that we make that we don't recognize our biases heavily influence. And so it's trying, when we have the opportunities in that space, to try to slow down and recognize when we see those fast traps, so we can slow down and really think about the decision that we're making, and are we letting our bias get the best of us, in that moment. And so, you can train people to work with their biases to where they're not having a negative impact on people. And as we work to do that, and as we have more of these tough and difficult conversations with one another, where people have a safe space to talk about these things, and they're not going to be thrown under the bus, or, they're not going to be ostracized for speaking, their truth and how they really feel and how they really see things. That's how we work through and help educate each other on the differences that we are, because that's the beauty of our society. I really believe that it's just how unique and different everyone is. And if we can create an environment where people can lend their unique perspectives to the topic and to the conversation of what we're talking about, we can help educate each other, and we can help, do a better job of building up those foundations and those relationships that we need to build up. But at the end of the day, it comes back to everybody recognizing that we have biases, and we have to learn how to work with them.
I think that's a great point. And, when I talk about biases, I'm not just talking about white police officers. Black police officers come with their own biases about members of the Black community. That's, the research has sort of revealed that. So you're right. We all sort of come with our own biases. And so getting rid of them perhaps is not really the question. It's how do you work with those biases so that they do not harm other people. Chief, you're a member of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. What conversations have you had with your colleagues about how police treat people of color and how to better serve these communities?
That's something that we talk about constantly. I was just on a panel this weekend with Noble, and that's a lot of what we were talking about. Noble has adopted the mantra of reimagining, policing. And so we have to really sit down and talk about, what does that look like? And one thing that I've always highlighted on, in the time that I've been in the profession is, historically, we've done a good job of interacting with people that we've had good relationships with. And so, those citizens, those community members, have historically normally supported the police department, and, whatever we had going on. But we also have to recognize that those relationships and those partnerships weren't as strong with the entire community that we serve. And just because somebody may have something bad or something negative to say about the police department, that doesn't give me the right as a police chief or as a police organization to dismiss what they have to say. I need to be just as intentional of trying to get them to the table and have conversations with them as I am to the people that I know are going to speak favorably and highly, of the police department, because those individuals, they have something just as valuable to say. And what they have to offer could help me, do our job better, because at the end of the day, our job is to provide quality service to the residents in the community that we serve. And so that's been a really big focus, whether we're talking about the IACP or Noble, of what the membership has really been trying to work towards and trying to build up to is, what can we do as being the face of most of the communities that we serve in? The police department, police officers, that's the first arm, if you will, of representation for that local body, that local entity. And so how do we do a better job of tapping into everybody, all parts of our community, not just the ones that like us and have positive things to say about us? And I think especially in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed, you have seen just a very vigorous commitment to doing that and to having those conversations and making sure that we're being more inclusive and reaching out and just being, more willing to meet people where they are, because that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And something that some of us have been working towards, for years now, where, some parts of the country or some organizations or agencies are really just now starting to see the benefit of that and trying to implement, some of those measures.
I want to hit you with another hot topic. We spoke to Senator Cory Booker. He's part of a bipartisan group of senators that are trying to hammer out the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the Senate, get it passed in the Senate. For him, qualified immunity reform is a must-have. What's your take on that?
There's been a lot of talk about qualified immunity, over the last year, if you will. And one of the things that I've been an advocate for in any topic that we're talking about is just making sure that we do our homework and we do our due diligence in what we're looking at. And while I do not agree with just a straight, all right, we need to do away with qualified immunity, I do not agree with that approach. What I do agree with is us taking a deep dive into qualified immunity and just really looking at its use and how it has been used in the courts and how it has been applied, to look and see if there are some changes or some tweaks that need to be made to it. And that's where, I would hope the individuals that are making those decisions and looking to implement these things are doing their homework and really looking at it, because this is not just, a knee-jerk. This can't be a knee-jerk reaction to somebody brings it up and now, all right, that's the hot topic, and all right, we just got to get rid of qualified immunity. I do believe it does have its place and it does serve a purpose, in the profession, because of what we have to deal with. And anybody, who can sit back and just say, all right, well, the police, this is what we see, and this is what we see happening with police officers. So, we just want to take this away and have them fend for themselves. All right, I would challenge all of you all to get with your local police departments and go down and do some training with them, do some use of force training and some of the decision-making training that officers go through, which doesn't even come close in comparison to what we have to deal with out on the streets, and see how you fare in those situations before, man, we just automatically, want to attack something and say, okay, we have to get rid of this. So, without doing the homework, without doing the research and just really looking to see how qualified immunity is applied in situations, I'm not in favor of just taking it away. I am in favor of us really, really looking into it and doing a deep dive into it to look and see what changes or what tweaks need to be made through the courts that would make it, if we're saying that it's not working for us, instead of just scrapping it and throwing it away, let's look and see how we can improve it to where, it's still something, that we probably need to have in place and we can still have the accountability that everybody is looking for. But once again, when we talk about it, and the conversation that they're having at the national level, the majority of that applies to federal agencies and federal officers, and not your local. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. You know, when we have the different levels of government that are talk about enacting these changes, the public often doesn't know who that impacts. And a lot of the stuff that I've seen in the reform bill has to deal at the federal level with federal agents and federal officers, which that wouldn't apply to me here as a local police chief in a local police department. And so, you know, when we want to do things, you know, we want to make sure we're doing them for the right reasons.
I think you make a really good point. I think that, you know, the way federal law enforcement operates, it's very different than local law enforcement. A federal officer is not getting a 911 call from a dispatcher who's, you know, maybe given them kind of limited information, and they're kind of running into a scene that they know nothing about. I spoke to civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and he said something really interesting in regards to qualified immunity. He said we have to stop allowing fear to be a defense. And I know that you've kind of looked into a lot of these situations that get out of hand where people are hurt or injured. And you've said before that fear is kind of at the center of a lot of these bad decisions. I don't know. Can you train away fear? Can you put a policy in place to limit fear? It seems like, you know, we're trying to find ways to manage people and emotions that just, it doesn't sort of fit neatly into the box of, you know, sort of here's a new policy, now follow it.
Correct. Yes, there is no policy that you can enact that will do away with the fear that people have or that officers have in going out in some of the situations that we have to go out into. And that's why you hear people talk so much about the community engagement aspect of community policing and getting to know your community. Because if I know you and I have a relationship with you, then, you know, that lessens the fear that we have. And so a prime example I can give you, when I got here to Ferguson, I partnered with a local nonprofit, Boys to Mentors, and we started a basketball program called Ballin' with the Cop, where we would bring in, you know, young males, predominantly from our lower income parts of the community, and they would have a basketball tournament. And so these kids, you know that they were playing against adults. And so I'm one of the individuals that they're playing with. And after we finished playing this tournament, that's when they learned that they were playing with police officers and that they were playing with the police chief. And so we talked to them and mentored to them. And so my first introduction to these young males was not in a police role or police, you know, enforcement measure. We were just playing basketball and everything that comes along with just competitive sports. Fast forward a couple months. Now I'm at work, I'm in uniform, I'm riding through the city, and I'm riding through those neighborhoods, and I see one of the kids that I played basketball with at that tournament, and I get out of my car and I call out to him, and he turns around and he looks at me. So now he's looking at a police officer in uniform. But you know what I didn't see? I didn't see that fear in him that I normally would see, man, when I get out and I'm trying to go talk to somebody because they don't know what I'm coming to talk to them about. When he saw me, he saw the basketball player. He didn't see the police chief or the police officer. And he didn't have that fear. And so the first thought wasn't, do I need to take off running because the police have got out here to stop me? Came over, we had a great conversation and great interaction. And so that's how you work on that fear, is we have to create more opportunities for positive interactions that are not solely based on police functions, if you will, or police enforcement measures. We have to create, you know, more time, more space, and more energy into those interactions so we can get to know people better and people can get to know us better. Where when we go into those situations, man, we're dealing with people that, you know, we have seen more often or we've had some interactions with previously, where that lessens that fear. And that's how we work on that fear. But you're right, there's no policy that we can create that's going to reduce that fear in the profession.
You know, it's so fascinating how sometimes the remedy is so low tech. I mean, you said it earlier, just meet people where they are. If they're on the basketball court, meet them there first. That was a really fascinating story. Chief Jason Armstrong, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.